All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, land of Plaid and Coffee, and PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and guess what? That's right, another Bigfoot encounter story. So here's the deal. Real quick, wanted to give a shout out, of course, to Mike out there at Bigfoot's Wilderness. And yes, my good friend William Jevning over there at Creek Devil. And a new shout out today, I wanted to give out to some friends of mine. You know, I've always telling you guys a little bit about the old Sasquatch coffee, which I'm going to take a sip of real quick. Really enjoy the old Sasquatch coffee. You can catch that over at squatchcoffee.com. None of this stuff that I do before this encounter reading is sponsored. None of it. I don't make any money off of there. So there you go. These are things that I enjoy for the most part. So there you are. As a matter of fact, I have been invited over there to help out and to work with a little bit on Monster X Radio, monsterxradio.com. You can go over there and check it out. Good friend Gunner from Sasquatch Coffee Company is actually, that's right, he's one of the hosts and part of the team over there at Monster X Radio. So here's the deal. I want you to get over there. It's going to be really awesome. It's going to be really fun. And don't forget, you can get to monsterxradio.com, sign up for the newsletter there. So you can get all the updated, they're going to be doing reports of some of the live, or basically a lot of the researchers around North America. They're going to be interviewing them. They're going to try to do probably like at least one weekly update of the research going on. Which is going to be pretty awesome. Not to mention the interviews and all the other informative, basically podcasts and video casts that they'll be doing through the channel. So they are going to be upping a lot of their stuff on YouTube, so you can follow along with that as well, and follow all of us over there at monsterxradio.com. It's going to be fun and great, but I will still be here on PacWest Bigfoot doing my thing, so there you go. But get on over there, monsterxradio.com, monsterxradio.com, and enjoy. So let's get on with this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. Old Man Winter. I mean Bigfoot. It was the winter of 1956, right around Christmas time. That's when I would see Old Man Winter rear his ugly head at me. Well, actually, it was a Bigfoot, and he did. He looked right at me and into my soul. I was home that night alone. I was still in some pain, and the leg was not faring so well. So instead of Bible study that night with my wife, I stayed home. Besides, I wanted to get a better look at this thing, and I had to get even. But I got that wish, and to be honest, I'm glad I did, even though I never wished to see another one of these things again, ever. The loss at Okinawa. I fought that battle, one of the last battles in the Pacific, the Battle of Okinawa. It was not a day into the action when I would lose my leg. It happened so fast. I mean, so fast I had no idea I was hit so seriously at first. We were there, walking along a ridge, when I noticed movement to the north of us about 40 yards out. It was a company of Japanese soldiers lying in wait for us. Before I could even yell out to my patrol, the bullets were whizzing in the air, and you could see them everywhere flying past us. I watched as Bill, a really great guy, was hit. He fell and would never get up again. I saw my friends Henry and Peter. They were running back towards me, towards cover. But I knew they would not make it unless, of course, I could take some of that fire off of them. I did just that. Without thought, I moved out of the cover I'd taken and started shooting up the further ridge, yelling for them to move and get on the other side of me. Peter was hit, but they both made it. As for me, as I turned to run, I felt the heat and massive sting briefly as 4 bullets found their way in and out of my leg. I tumbled, rolled, and realized the real amount of pain I was in after a few seconds. But I kept firing until I noticed Henry grabbing and telling me it was okay, and another company of ours was moving in and forcing the enemy's retreat. That is when I smiled, he said, and I passed out. I lost my leg in one of the last battles of the Great War. Pegleg and Bigfoot. I made it home, and my wife was so relieved she would not let me out of her sight for, well, the rest of her life, until she went to be home with the Lord a few years ago. However, from time to time, she let me use my leg as an excuse, a legitimate excuse to skip church or the occasional Bible study on Wednesdays. Instead, I would wait for my visitor, a scary visitor, but a visitor nonetheless, to show up. It started when we moved to Arlington, Washington. Back then it was still a pretty small town, but it was growing, and we found a home up around what is now Arlington Heights. Back then it was just a few homes and nothing but forest beyond it, the Boulder River wilderness. That is still there today, and what I could tell the last time I was there visiting family, there was still nothing but forest back up in there. But this is not about the population of a town today. This is about my visitor. Was it scary? This Bigfoot creature? Yes, very. I never trusted it for a moment, and I had a good reason. Seriously, that darn thing nearly killed my dog. I know it was being harassed by Monty, but he did not need to do that. But wild things are just that. Wild things, I suppose. The maiming of Monty was the first experience I'd have with this thing, too. It was Sunday evening, and I decided to stay home instead of joining my wife for the evening worship and Bible study at church. My leg really was bothering me, and after being prodded by my doctor for the 1,000th time the day before, well, I was in no mood for walking around. Of course, she relented, and I watched her pull out of the driveway around 6 p.m. in the old Chevy 210 we had purchased the year before. I had an old Chevy pickup too, but that was for work only. I decided to do the dishes at least. That would not be too uncomfortable, seeing how it was just her and I, and no kids just yet. She wanted them, but I wanted to wait just a bit longer to make sure we were ready. But, to be honest, I was looking forward to having at least two, and soon. I stood there thinking about children when Monty started growling. It was not the first time something ruffled his feathers on the property. Back then, coyote, black bear, and even some wolves were still about, and sometimes wandering onto the property pretty regularly. I pulled the curtain back, and with the street lamp that lit the property well enough, I could not see a thing out there. No bear, no other animal, no movement at all. I told him to hush and go lay down. He did, and moved to a spot on the couch next to where I sat. I continued drying the dishes when he started up again, but this time he was barking up a storm, while standing on top of the couch and facing out the window and into the front yard. By this time, I have to say, the ferocity of his bark had me intrigued as to what was outside wandering around my house. As I said, I was used to the usual nuisance and decided I would take the old shotgun out with me and scare off whatever it was. Besides, if I didn't, well, there'd be work of cleaning up the garbage strewn out all over the yard from the animal outside, tearing through it later. I slipped on the prosthetic leg. Not that they were all that great back then, but it was good enough, I suppose. I walked out on the porch, tuned my ears to the sounds of the night. Hopefully the sound of whatever it was that was making Monty go crazy like that. I heard nothing but a slight breeze, and I could smell the heaviness of the air. It was getting colder, and soon I knew the snow would start up again. But as I peered around a bit, I noticed my fence made of log poles down towards the end of the driveway, and they seemed, well, knocked over, I guess you'd say. I was not about to go out there and see if they were or not. It was dark, wet, and slippery out there. Plus, the cold made my leg ache even worse. I decided to check on it in the morning. While doing some other chores, I would be more mentally ready for the outside. I listened for a few more, glanced around, but nothing. The only sound I heard was Monty in back of me, who was now over the barking, but shivering horribly instead. We went back inside for the night. Tracks to Nowheresville. The next day, I was up at the crack of dawn. I wanted to see that fence. You could say I was a bit particular about things as a young man, but to be honest, I got more particular with age, just as the kids and grandkids would tell you. But I was up, and with the thermos in hand and my tool bag over my shoulders, I was going to fix the fence if needs be. Needs had been for sure. The fence was not only knocked down, but a few poles were also tossed nearly 20 feet away, it looked like. They could not have rolled into snow there. The ground was level, and the snow was now about 14 inches in accumulation. It was weird. So weird. I literally scratched my head thinking who in the world was on my property. This was not a bear or wolf thing, nor a coyote. This involved a mean and nasty person in pulling them apart and dragging them off so far. And that was the next part of the weirdness that would befall me. There were no drag marks. They had not even been They had to have been tossed, which was not feasible with the distance they now sat from where the fence was. When I noticed the tracks, large footprints to be exact, that's when I knew. Now, I know snowshoes, and I have a friend at the time who wore a size 12 shoe, which just looked enormous to me, but these tracks were not from my friend, nor someone possibly lost and walking in snowshoes around my property. These prints, but not all of them, just a couple I could tell, well, they had toes to them. A huge person with no shoes had apparently been passing through, and seeing how these footprints looked much larger than that of my old friend, well, they might have been big enough to do such a thing as toss those large poles or logs into the trees beyond. I was stumped. Pardon the pun, but I was. At that moment, I felt an uneasiness come over me, and the cold started biting at my own stump, causing some twitching pain. So I headed back to the house, all the while wondering what in the world had happened. Who was on my property wrecking my beautiful and rustic-looking fence? I was determined to find out. That was for sure. Oh, Monty. Christmas was approaching, and the wife and I would be decorating outside one late afternoon. Of course, I would string some lights, but not too high, as I and ladders were not on good terms any longer, but across the banister that sat on our front porch. I strung them that late afternoon. My wife helped with a few wreaths on the windows, some garland too, but the lights were my job, and Monty joined me. Eventually, about halfway through the job, my wife brought me outside and brought me some hot soup she had made, and headed to the car in hopes of making it to church on time given the snowfall that early morning, and cooking us up a great potato soup. That left Monty and me to our task, and then a good book on the couch. I ate, washed my plate, grabbed some coffee to take back with me to the task of putting up the lights. As I started back to the task, I heard something, like a tree snap, a large and loud tree snap at that. It sounded like a large, thick limb basically breaking off a tree or something. Of course, you would think it was snow load, but that would have been impossible. At the sound of this limb, I thought it had to be pretty large, and there was not enough snowfall to cause that, not even close. Monty was at my feet, and as I looked down, I could see his head was tilted, and his ears were alert to something not far off in the trees. When it started, a shriek, so loud it actually had me jump a bit, which caused again a painful twitch up my leftover leg. Monty started growling, and her head seemed to be following something from south to north as his head turned and his ears still tuned into, well, something walking through the trees. And there was something, because again, a shriek that sounded so scary and just god-awful came out of those woods. And I felt it just directly right through me. Monty, to my surprise, bolted. But not back behind me or through the doggy door I installed, but off the porch and straight into the woods to my horror. Before I knew it, I was crashing down the porch steps because I'd slipped trying to stop him. I gathered myself together, grabbed my cane, and started heading for the tree line too. But before I even made it to the other side of the driveway, I heard a yelp, and not a good one. Monty was in trouble, and I suddenly found myself both frightened and angry. I called for him and kept walking on and realized I was unarmed, but I kept going, and I had to get to Monty. I followed what tracks I could make out, and finally, near the foot of a large Douglas fir, I found him. He was barely moving. His breath was shallow, and the only sound he could make was the softest whimpering I'd ever heard. I went to pick him up, and although it was hurting him, he let me. As I started to turn around and head back, I caught something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow that seemed, well, not quite right. I stopped, looked at it, and noticed it was swaying. It was someone because I could see it was the shape of a man, but for some reason I knew in my gut that this was no person. This was not even human. And with that, a growl came from this thing. It filled Monty and me with such terror that I knew if I did not get out of there at that moment, we would never make it out. I turned and hobbled as fast as I could, leaving my cane behind and looking over my shoulder from time to time until I was on the porch of the house. Monty had 2 broken legs and some ribs were cracked. It was as if he was thrown against that tree I found him under. I was mad, angry as all get out at that thing, that massive dark shadow for hurting him like that. And while I know it was not smart for Monty to tear off like that at a wild animal, or in this case, thing or creature, still, I was mad. So I decided I would wait for this thing and see if I could either scare it off my property or, if needs be, take it down. Old Man Winter. Reconnaissance. I was good at it. So doing a bit of it around the property, I learned that this thing, this shadow of a thing, whatever it was, had been frequenting the property at night, literally almost every night. And soon enough, I figured out why. My smokehouse. I hunted back then. Most of the meat I either got myself or butchered it for others and kept a bit for the work done. Apparently, I attracted more than a bear, a wolf, or a coyote closer to the property when I started burying the guts and other parts in the woods around the house. As I stated back then, there were very few houses out this way. But this thing was digging them up, it looked like. At the direction it would exit would be basically through the front of the house, the front yard, and disappeared into the tree line in the woods beyond. That night, 2 nights after Christmas Day, I'd be waiting with my gun in hand. Funny thing was, I would not have to wait long either. My wife left for Wednesday night service early that night, as there was a dinner with the ladies beforehand. So that gave me the next 3 dark hours to wait. I watched as she pulled out of the driveway, and by that point I was always on the lookout for this thing and made sure my wife made it to the car safely every time she needed to head to the store or church, of course. I went back in as the taillights disappeared beyond the trees and turned on to the main road. I checked on Monty, grabbed my gun and cup of coffee, and headed out into the cold, cold night to sit and wait. Not an hour later, I heard the crunching of snow and the breaking of branches and brush heading right for the house directly ahead of me. It was slow coming, but the heaviness of the footfall could be heard for sure. The branches cracking. Well, I knew something was about to go down. It stopped. The walking, the crunching through the snow, it stopped completely. I stood up slowly, tucked my rifle under my arm, and stepped down off the porch, slowly. With my right hand, I shielded the streetlight from my face so I could see better. There in the shadows, it swayed back and forth. However, this time a glint of yellow and green could be seen flashing from the light's reflection from its eyes. It was massive, that's for sure. This thing had to be all of 8 feet tall, maybe a bit more, but 8 feet at least. I was scared, but I was resolute in getting even for this thing hurting my dog like that. Suddenly, there was a grunt. And then to my surprise, that thing, that massive Bigfoot, took 2 steps out from the tree line and stood just inside the light and stared right at me. It was not all black or brown hair like some have reported over the years. This one, well, I'm going to guess was old. I have seen some sketches over time of these things, and all looked younger than he had. He was a male for sure, and he was covered in light gray hair with blotches of white here and there. Its eyes, the skin around them seemed old, wrinkled, and seemed worn by time and rough living, to be honest. Its shoulders were massive, but its body was lean, and the arms seemed to reach just past the knees of this creature. In all this, I forgot I had the gun with me, and I forgot why I had it too. It looked right at me, right into my soul, it felt like. I had this feeling as though it was not going to hurt me, and for some reason I felt as though it wanted to let me know it did not mean to hurt anyone. The look on its face, although scary looking in and of itself, seemed to say, "I'm sorry." I don't know how to explain it, but that's how I felt. Then this Bigfoot proved what I had felt all of a sudden. It bent a bit at the waist and sat something on the edge of the driveway. The next thing I remember, I was looking back up at this thing as it disappeared back into the tree line and darkness. After a minute of hearing this thing walking off, I approached whatever it was that had sat on the ground. Amazed, I looked down to find an old chew rope of Monty's. I had lost it a year before out in the woods while chopping some wood the summer before. I knew then that this thing was wild, but at the same time, it was highly intelligent too. I knew that what Monty did was careless, and this thing was probably acting out of pure instinct and irritableness of a yippy-yapper biting at his heels, I am sure. While I hated what it did to Monty, as I held that rope in my hand and stared at the forest, I knew in my heart what had just transpired. I came out to get a good look and to get even, but instead, I got an experience in forgiveness, and well, what is really out in the woods of the state of Washington. I do not care to see another one, as I said. Once was truly enough. Goodbye. My name is Gary, and first and foremost, that was a story my mother told me 3 Christmases ago. My dad, Morgan, was a beloved father, husband, and yes, a veteran. He passed away 4 years ago, and my mother passed away last year. He never told my sister and me this story growing up. I am not sure why, but for some reason, my mother wanted to share it with us. I'm not sure why she did, but now my sister and I have a Christmas story to tell our family and theirs for a lifetime to come.